Alright, how's it going, everybody? So today I thought I was going to switch course. I've made one video so far with this type of video where I sort of analyze opening mistakes from master games. And at first I started with the Anderson opening, so a3 on the first move, then Polish opening, a4 on the first move. And for this one, I thought that this isn't really very relatable because, I mean, how many people actually play these moves, especially online? So I thought I was going to switch to something a lot more relatable. So today I'm going to start covering d4 and all the potential variations and black's replies to this move in order to understand how to punish subpar moves and what to do against all the different moves that you can encounter. Because, for example, in one video recently, I tried to play the Catalan, and once my pawn was already here and another pawn was here, my opponent played e5, which is the Budapest defense, and I didn't have a good reply. I ended up just taking because what else do you do? And then his knight was here, he attacked my pawn, and he got a lot of development, and I just got really confused. I ended up blundering. So yeah, I thought that I'm going to start with d4, cover all the potential variations from not all the potential variations, all the mistakes that the book covers that I'm taking these games from. And there's 1,000 games in the book, so there's really a lot of mistakes that are going to happen with d5 and all the different development moves that can happen. Then I'm going to switch to e4 and then to c4. And then maybe we'll go back to a3, maybe h3 on the first move, a4, Hikaru's b3. Sorry, I said a4, I meant b4, and then maybe b3 with a bishop. There are a lot of things that can happen here. So without further ado, let's start this game. So this first game was played in Lucerne, Switzerland in 1982, and it was played between Mazhar Hussein with white pieces and Willy Zabasaja with black pieces. So as I mentioned earlier, white opens with d4 and black replies with b5. It's not a mistake, this is a defense. It's called the Polish defense. I mean, this is a Polish opening and this is the Polish defense. And the engine already doesn't like this move. It gives around 1.5 plus for white. So, but there's theory here. People have played this, so this isn't yet a mistake. This is an offbeat opening to take maybe your opponent out of prep. Perhaps Willy Zabasaja didn't want to face Mr. Hussein's preparation or something like that, so he just thought, I'm going to open with b5 and let's have a fight. And this is a bit of a tame move. e3, you should really play e4 instead of e3 to take the full center. If you watch the Gotham chess videos, you know that he always says if you have the opportunity, place two of your pawns over here to take the full center. But this isn't really a mistake or anything. This gives away like maybe 0.8 points of advantage, but nothing crazy. You're attacking this pawn and you're not allowing your opponent to develop on this nice diagonal quite yet. So to counter this, black just defends the pawn with a6, and white immediately tries to attack this kind of it's not really a pawn chain yet, it's just two pawns, but it's really, white is trying to win a pawn here already. So here black decided to take, and this is a bit of a mistake. This isn't huge yet, but the engine says that this is much better. Because you can't really win a pawn here. Like if you remember this position, you can't take, because imagine if the bishop here, you're losing a rook. So bishop to b7 would have led to an equal game, but black decided to take. Of course, white recaptures, And then black just thought, I'm going to develop my bishop to b7 now, and everything is fine. But it's not fine, because this is actually a blunder and it loses the game pretty much, because white just simply plays queen to d3 and queen to b3, and queen to b3 attacks this bishop and threatens mate on f7, because I mean, if you were, let's say, if you were to take this pawn, white just checkmates you. And what you should play here, I mean, you are either losing a bishop, or getting checkmated, or the engine says the best move is queen to c8, just defending this bishop, giving up this pawn. But if you were to play this move, white just captures the pawn, and then really anything. Like, for example, the engine says that the best move here is d5, just stopping this bishop from attacking this pawn, and just once you develop all your pieces, because the king's defenses are shattered and none of the pieces are developed yet, and you're just gonna you're just gonna suffer terribly and you're gonna lose this game. So at this point, black simply resigned. So always pay attention when you're developing your bishop here. Always pay attention to this pawn. This pawn traditionally is very weak, but like this pawn and this pawn in chess are always very weak, because this pawn is only defended by the king, and this pawn initially is only defended by the queen. So these are traditionally the points of attack for white, and of course for black it would be c2 and f2. So let's go to the sort of the critical move. So here, once white recaptures, what you should play is either d5 to stop this bishop's attack, because the queen defends and the bishop will have to go back, or you could play e6, sorry, either d5 or e6 to really stop this bishop's attack towards this pawn. But black played bishop to b7, and this is completely losing. So let's move to the next game. So continuing with our theme here, so this game is between Max Euwe and Gerald Abrahams, and it was played in Bournemouth, England in 1939. And like, just to give you an understanding of who these people are, I'm not so sure about who Gerald Abrahams is, but Max Euwe was either a world champion or world number one. And even though, like, I remember watching like sort of grandmaster or world champion tier list by Hikaru and Gotham Chess, and they were saying that, especially Hikaru was saying that Max Euwe was lucky to be a world champion. But even if you're lucky and you're a world champion, you are an extremely strong player. So let's see what happens here. So we have d4, and then his opponent opens with b5, continuing the theme. And here Max Euwe showing how, like, just showing that he's a very strong player. He understands chess principles. He just puts two pawns in the center, and he says, I'm already better. And in fact, this is true, because white is enjoying a plus 1.5 over black already in this position. So black just develops a bishop here, and the idea is, okay, if you take my pawn, I take your pawn, and I'm trading the b pawn for the e pawn, and I'm sort of shattering your center. So of course, Max Euwe doesn't want to do that, so he just defends his pawn, and he says, okay, I have this big center here, and I have no intention of giving it up. Black here defends his pawn, because now taking really was a threat. And Max Euwe goes after the pawns immediately with c4. Black captures, because there is really nothing better to do. If you were not, I mean, if you played something like this, you are numbing your bishop here, and if you do something weird, I don't know, let's say you just develop here, I just take the pawn and I win a pawn. Everything from the white side is protected here, and white is just better. When you're a player as strong as Max Öwe and you have a pawn up in a position like this, you're pretty much winning this game. So black decided to capture, and then of course white recaptures with the bishop. And here, like, not to make a mistake of the previous game, like we've seen in the previous game, I mean, black goes e6 to stop this pawn's, this bishop's threat towards this pawn. And white says, okay, I'm already a little bit better. I'm just gonna continue developing with knight to c3. And black decides to play d5. And d5 is not the best of moves. It seems like it's threatening to win this bishop, but actually Max Öwe plays the best move recommended by the engine, and he just goes queen to b3. If you take my pawn, I take your bishop, and then you're gonna have a lot of problems, because where is this knight going? I mean, this knight is probably going here in order for the queen to protect the rook, but this position is already very hard to play for black, and as I mentioned earlier, like, white is pretty much winning here. So black decided to continue developing, and again, this isn't the best move. So white shows why. He just captures a pawn, and if you recapture, I have ideas of capturing this bishop, because you won't be able to capture my bishop as I take your knight with check, and your position just completely crumbles here. Black tries to employ some trick. I mean, black already knows that he's probably losing, so he's trying to take this pawn, attacking the queen, hoping for some tricks and a mistake for white. But white just calmly plays queen takes b7, and black plays rook to e8. I mean, sure, what else do you play? You're trying to kick this queen, and in reality this queen doesn't have that many squares. You have some off chance of maybe trapping this queen, but not really, because Max Öwe just calmly plays queen takes a6, and black just continues harassing the queen, because you can't go here, the knight protects this square, you can't go here, the knight protects this square, of course you can't go here, you can go here, but then black is just going to continue checking you, and other than that you don't really have any moves. So perhaps this is what black thought was going to happen. And he just thought, okay, I'm probably winning your queen, or it's a draw. There's nothing serious happening here. But there is, because white just simply plays bishop to b5 check. And if you the best move recommended by the engine is taking this bishop, but you just recapture with the queen, and white is just up a piece plus up a pawn and winning this game easily. So this is probably what black missed, and black thought that okay, let me move my king to e7, sorry, I'm still attacking your queen, I'm attacking your bishop, okay, what do you have here? And interestingly, there is a completely winning move. I didn't see this at all when I was analyzing this position myself, but the best move here is pawn to d6 check, because if you take with a king, I mean, and you're probably, what am I saying? You can't take with a king, of course, because the queen protects this square. If you take with the queen, this isn't much better. I just take your rook, and of course, I mean, the engine says that the best move is king to f6, but when the engine says the best move is king to f6, you're already completely losing. So black just took a pawn and says, okay, either you're winning, either there is something, or I can defend. But of course there is something, and white just simply played bishop to g5 check. And no matter what you do, either you block with a knight. Let's just show blocking with a knight because it's a bit nicer. Even if you block with a knight, white just plays queen to b7 check, and basically once this bishop arrived here, there's no stopping checkmate, and the only move for you is to block with the queen. And because the bishop and the queen are attacking here, you take with the queen, and this is checkmate because the knight is pinned to the king. So if we go back to see what the mistake was, really so this, I mean, this is okay, this isn't losing or anything, this move. I mean, there were mistakes made just before, and here black should just take the bishop and allow capture of this bishop and move this knight here to protect the rook. But the position is already better for black, but at least it's not losing. But what black decided to do was knight to c6, and now this is much worse, because as we saw, black just captured the pawn, captured the bishop, and after this nice sequence and this pawn sacrifice, this pawn sacrifice with check, this is mate in 2 now, and black got checkmated. So yeah, very interesting. So always be careful when your opponent plays b5 on the first, or if you play b5 on the first move, you always have to be very careful of your king. Your king can be in danger, so you have to, once you develop this bishop over here, you need to be very careful on this side of the board, because you're really opening up here, and the queen, as we've seen, theme is queen going here attacking this pawn once these pawns get traded, because this bishop is undefended. So you need to be very careful with this opening. But all right, let's move to the last game of today. This game was played in 1993 in Oklahoma in the US. This is kind of interesting because all the previous games, the book gives a city and the country that this was played, but for this one it gives a state and the country. I don't know what city this was played in, but it was in Oklahoma. But anyway, it was played between Matthew Stinson and Ray Lonkarevich. And may I remind you, these are master games, so I'm not sure as to the exact rating of these players, but they're either national masters, FIDE masters, international masters, or even grandmasters. And of course, like we saw in the previous game, Max Oiva was a world champion and obviously a grandmaster. So definitely very strong players, and it just shows you that if you play offbeat openings, it is very easy to blunder your way into just completely losing very quickly. So you have to be very careful. So continuing with the theme, we have d4, a5, and we have e4, of course, taking the center, and then now black plays bishop to b7, saying, okay, if you capture my pawn, I capture your pawn, and I'm trading my b pawn for your e pawn and shattering your center, which of course not something white wants to do. And white just simply and calmly defends with bishop to g3, not allowing capturing of this pawn. White goes e6. This seems like a preemptive move for me, because we've seen there can be a lot of problems on this square when something like this happens, and just a safe move. So white continues developing with knight to f3, and black finally defends the pawn. So now this is no longer a threat. You don't have to worry about any tactics here, like maybe white in some position, white gives up this pawn and completely shatters your position on the queen side. White just calmly castles here, And here we have d5. And d5 is not a great move because, I mean, you develop this bishop on this nice diagonal, and now you've just put your pawn in front of this bishop, and even if this bishop relocates here, there's another pawn. So you're really blockading your bishop. And of course, white understands this, and he plays e5, saying, okay, now this pawn isn't going anywhere, this pawn isn't going anywhere. What is your bishop doing here? You're basically, I'm closing the center here, and I'm going to try to attack on the queen side. Black says, okay, I am trying to take this pawn maybe, and or even move this bishop. I'm trying to somehow open this bishop, I guess. So if white was to take here, you could advance this pawn over here. So yeah, so but white doesn't want to have a trade here, so white just reinforces the center, says, okay, if you move, I'll just slide back, and I still have this bishop nicely pointy in your king side, and your bishop is completely locked in and can't counteract this bishop. And if you take and I take, these pawns are still not going anywhere, and your bishop is locked in. So black just tries to continue developing, and like we mentioned, king side attacks on this pawn, like with this knight's move over here, you're already threatening to capture on h7, you're threatening to capture on f7, and nothing good is going to happen here unless you play properly. So the best move according to the engine here is to play g6. As I mentioned many times already, this bishop is locked in here because of this pawn. So what you should do here is replace this bishop on a king side with the pawns on light squares, so that to give more protection to your king. But black didn't do this, and black just didn't see any danger here, and black decided to kick the knight away with h6, but because black's king side is completely undeveloped, white just continues the attack and plays queen to h5, and queen to h5 pins this pawn to this rook, because if you take the knight, I take the rook, and then my king is already on the last rank and none of these pieces are developed. I mean, where is your knight going? It's h6 was a big mistake. And you're threatening checkmate here, of course. So, sorry about that. So, of course, black sees that there is a threat of checkmate here, so he tries to defend it with queen to e7, but this position is already losing, and in fact, what white played here is just simply knight takes f7, because, I mean, of course you can't take with the rook, you can't move the king anywhere, all the squares are taken, and if you can't go here because knight is controlling this square, and because you can't move your king, you're threatening all sorts of nasty discoveries, as Agenmatter would say. So black ended up taking the knight, and white just simply played bishop to g6 with this very nice pin from the queen to the king, and you're winning the queen here, and black's position is shattered, and you're just completely winning this game, obviously. So as you can see here, this b5 move and developing your bishop here is very difficult to play properly. Even though the engine says you can kind of play this, it's a bit worse, but it's like being down a pawn. But if you play properly and your opponent doesn't know this position that well, then you can maybe trick him or something like that, take him out of preparation, and yeah, just just maybe equalize or even trap him somehow. But if white plays properly and black makes a mistake, which is very easy to do when you play this opening, like already when this move happened, and with the advancement of this pawn, this bishop, as I mentioned many times, is locked in. And even if black played h6 in this position when the knight arrived here, even if you played g5, sorry, what am I saying? If you played g6, trying to numb this bishop, this position is still +1 for white. And with correct play, white is probably going to win. But black played h6, and this is a big mistake because the queen now has time to infiltrate, threaten checkmate, threaten the rook if you take. So yeah, this then ended very painfully for black. And even though he's up 2 pawns per minute, his queen is pinned to the king and he is completely losing this game. We're gonna continue watching these games, and probably a lot more of them will continue with the theme of d4 and b5, but we will get to other positions, and eventually we'll see what mistakes can happen after d4 or d5, and then maybe I'm really looking forward to really learning more about the Catalan. And another thing I want to understand is because I myself played the King's Indian defense quite a lot, I want to understand what tricks can happen when something like this happens, and then just with a normal so if you play the Catalan, maybe something happens like this, and this is a normal setup for because you're looking for this break or this break in the King's Indian. So we will get to this eventually. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you can learn something from these videos. Namely, when you open this bishop, be very careful not to lock it in, and be very careful of this square over here. And you always have to watch out, and you have to really see before once you play something like this, and if these pawns get traded, and let's say white responds with c4 and tries to open it, you have to be careful of this queen to b3 move, because it's threatening this pawn. If something's already attacking it, this is a problem, because once you develop this bishop here, it is undefended. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next video.